This movie was meant to revive audience interest in comic book adaptations and launch new Marvel franchises. Fortunately, it succeeded. The film was a commercial hit, received critical acclaim, and introduced Hollywood to the charismatic Hugh Jackman. Movies Inside Out presents X-Men is a superhero sci-fi action film based on Marvel Comics characters, telling the story of mutants, humans with superpowers forced to fight each other due to their differing worldviews. Which character did Michael Jackson dream of playing? Why did the actors consider the director's behavior unprofessional? And how did Titanic and Star Wars influence the movie? You'll find out the answers to these and other questions right now. The creation story. The story of X-Men began in 1984, when Marvel Comics writers and editors Jerry Conway and Roy Thomas wrote a screenplay for a future X-Men film. At the time, the film rights were owned by Orion Pictures, but development soon halted due to financial issues. In 1989, X-Men creators Stan Lee and Chris Claremont negotiated an adaptation with Carolco Pictures, planning to involve James Cameron as producer and Catherine Bigelow as director. Bob Hoskins was considered for the role of Wolverine, while Angela Bassett was eyed for Storm. However, Cameron became more interested in Spider-Man's story and decided not to take on X-Men. Ironically, the Spider-Man film also failed to materialize at that time. Carolco eventually went bankrupt, and the film rights reverted to Marvel. In 1992, Lee and Claremont pitched the project to Columbia Pictures, but the studio showed no interest. Meanwhile, the animated X-Men series began airing on Fox Kids and became a major success. This caught the attention of 20th Century Fox, and in 1994, producer Lauren Schuler Donner acquired the film rights for a live-action adaptation. Andrew Kevin Walker was initially hired to write the script, which was later revised by Laeta Kalogridis and Michael Chabon. Paul W.S. Anderson was offered the director's chair, but declined in favor of the sci-fi horror film Event Horizon. Other directors who turned down the project included Robert Rodriguez, Tim Burton, Richard Donner, Jean de Bont, Roland Emmerich, and Brett Ratner. Interestingly, Ratner would later direct X-Men: The Last Stand. At the same time, director Bryan Singer was looking to make a sci-fi film, and Fox offered him Alien Resurrection. However, producer, screenwriter, and Singer's friend Tom DeSanto believed X-Men would be a better fit, as Singer had experience working with ensemble casts in The Usual Suspects. Fox executives supported Singer's candidacy, but he had no particular interest in comic books and wasn't initially excited about the project. After multiple refusals, he finally gave in to DeSanto's persuasion and agreed to direct. According to Singer, he was drawn to the themes of discrimination and prejudice explored in the comics. DeSanto managed to get him so invested in X-Men that Singer read all the old comics, watched the animated series, and studied superhero literature extensively. This was when he decided which characters would appear in the film. Ed Solomon was hired for another script revision, while Singer was still working on Apt Pupil. However, Tom DeSanto wasn't satisfied with Solomon's version, leading Fox to bring in John Logan and James Schamus for additional rewrites and deeper character development. Eventually, DeSanto and Singer, along with Christopher McQuarrie, crafted their own script based on an $80 million budget. However, the studio, still unsure of the film's commercial viability, insisted on limiting the budget to $75 million. As a result, they had to remove Beast, Nightcrawler, and the Danger Room sequence from the script. Singer decided to take inspiration from The Matrix's action style and hired martial arts expert and stunt choreographer Corey Ewan. Joss Whedon was brought in to refine the final battle sequence. However, Whedon believed the entire script needed improvement and wrote a new version filled with pop culture references. Fox preferred Singer and DeSanto's serious tone so only 2 lines from Whedon's script made it into the final cut. Script development continued, with Bryan Singer's assistant, David Hayter, who was well versed in X-Men comics, writing new scenes. However, he contributed much more than a few additional scenes. By his account, more than half of the final script was his work. Interestingly, Hayter is credited as the sole screenwriter, despite many writers contributing to the film. According to some sources, Solomon and McQuarrie actually wrote the bulk of the script, but other writers requested that their names be omitted from the credits. In total, 28 different versions of the script were written, with each one significantly different from the last. Once the script was finalized, the director and producers moved on to casting. Casting. Fox began searching for an actor to play Wolverine as early as 1995. Initially, the top contender was singer Glenn Danzig, whose appearance closely matched the comic book character's description. However, he had to turn down the role due to his busy touring schedule. At different stages of production, Aaron Eckhart, Viggo Mortensen, Mel Gibson, Edward Norton, and Keanu Reeves were also considered for the role. Singer then offered the part to Russell Crowe. He also declined, but recommended an almost unknown Australian actor, Hugh Jackman. At the time, the producers did not take Jackman's candidacy seriously, and instead chose Dougray Scott. He signed a contract and was set to start filming after completing Mission Impossible 2. However, production on X-Men began earlier than planned, and Scott was still committed to Mission. Fox was forced to quickly find a replacement, leading to Hugh Jackman getting the role, which instantly made him a global star.
So read my mind.
I'd rather not.
Come on. You afraid you might like it?
I doubt it.
Ian McKellen was cast as Magneto, having previously worked with Singer on Apt Pupil. He was particularly drawn to the concept of mutants as outsiders, and saw a parallel between their struggles and the discrimination faced by the LGBTQ+ community.
I think what you really are afraid of is me.
However, shortly after signing the contract, McKellen received an offer from Peter Jackson to play Gandalf in The Lord of the Rings. The problem was that both films had overlapping shooting schedules, and McKellen didn't want to pass up either role. He asked Bryan Singer if his X-Men scenes could be filmed earlier, leading the director to adjust the entire production schedule so McKellen could participate in both projects. Other actors considered for Magneto included Terrence Stamp, David Hemblin, and Christopher Lee. For the role of Charles Xavier, also known as Professor X, Singer only had one actor in mind, Patrick Stewart. He had been particularly impressed by Stewart's performance in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Stewart had no knowledge of the X-Men comics and initially assumed the project was related to the X-Files, since their titles sound similar. To help him prepare, Singer sent him a box full of comics, which Stewart later described as the most fun he ever had getting ready for a role.
Experimentation on mutants. It's not unheard of. But I've never seen anything like this before.
Interestingly, Michael Jackson desperately wanted to play Professor X. The producers reminded him that Xavier was an elderly, white-haired man, but Jackson insisted that makeup could transform him for the part. Angela Bassett was initially the top choice for Storm, but she demanded a salary that exceeded the budget, forcing the studio to look elsewhere. Other candidates included Mariah Carey, Jada Pinkett Smith, and Janet Jackson, but the role ultimately went to Halle Berry.
You know what happens to a toad when it's struck by lightning? The same thing that happens to everything else.
Many well-known actresses were considered for Rogue, including Natalie Portman, Drew Barrymore, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Jennifer Love Hewitt, Christina Ricci, and Kirsten Dunst. However, the role ultimately went to the piano Oscar winner Anna Paquin.
I'm Rogue.
Jean Grey could have been played by Maria Bello, Charlize Theron, Julianne Moore, or Lucy Lawless. Helen Hunt also turned down the role before it eventually went to Famke Janssen.
Actually, I'm telekinetic. I can move things with my mind.
Really?
The role of Sabretooth was initially offered to wrestler Kevin Nash, but he declined due to scheduling conflicts. The part was then given to his former wrestling colleague Tyler Mane, who was unfamiliar with X-Men and prepared for the role with help from his comic book fan son. Cyclops was played by James Marsden, who turned down Soul Survivors to join X-Men. The original frontrunner for the role was Jim Caviezel, but he backed out at the last minute. Other actors considered included Ben Affleck, Ethan Hawke, and Matt Damon.
Oh, and Logan, stay away from my girl.
Jerry Ryan was in consideration for Mystique, but the role ultimately went to former model Rebecca Romaine.
You know, people like you are the reason I was afraid to go to school as a child.
Toad and Iceman were played by Ray Park and Shawn Ashmore, respectively. And of course, there was a Stan Lee cameo. He can be spotted near the hot dog stand on the beach when Senator Kelly, played by Bruce Davison, appears. The filming process. Initially, X-Men was scheduled to begin filming in mid-1999, with a planned release on Christmas 2000. However, at that time, Steven Spielberg moved the release of Minority Report from July to December, leaving Fox in need of a summer blockbuster. X-Men was chosen to fill that gap. Filming took place from September 22, 1999 to March 3, 2000 in Toronto, Hamilton, and other locations in Ontario. The Senate hearing scenes were filmed in the council chamber of Metro Hall. The exterior of Professor X's mansion was represented by Parkwood Estate in Oshawa, while its interiors were shot at Casa Loma, Roy Thompson Hall, and Metro Hall. Instead of Liberty Island and the Statue of Liberty, the scenes were filmed at Spencer Smith Park in Burlington. During production, cast and crew members frequently complained about Bryan Singer's unprofessional behavior. He was often late to set and had extreme mood swings, which he attributed to medication for back pain. However, it was well known that the director was struggling with substance abuse, to the point where producers had to be present on set to ensure he remained in control. Singer was also accused of giving small roles to young, sometimes underage, actors in exchange for sexual favors and bringing unrelated young men to business meetings. Additionally, Hugh Jackman was seriously injured due to Singer's negligence. Under the influence of illicit substances, the director insisted on shooting a stunt scene a day earlier than scheduled, before a stunt double was available. As a result, Jackman had to perform the stunt himself and suffered a severe leg injury. It's surprising that Singer wasn't removed from the project despite these issues. Still, Singer was committed to the film's success. To understand how CGI-heavy films were made, he visited the sets of Titanic and Star Wars, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. In addition to CGI, X-Men relied heavily on practical effects. Around 700 plastic, metal, and wooden Wolverine claws were created, with plastic ones being the most commonly used. The claws were attached to a special handle with wires running between Jackman's fingers. A mechanical rig was also designed to make the claws extend from his hands with the press of a switch. Some Wolverine scenes required CGI, so Jackman had tracking markers applied to his hands to digitally insert the claws later. Since Jackman was cast after filming had already begun, his physical condition varies throughout the film as he continued training during production. Interestingly, Jackman was unaware that real Wolverines existed before filming, so he initially studied wolves for inspiration. Meanwhile, Ian McKellen and Patrick Stewart had to learn how to play chess, so a trainer was hired to teach them the basics. To get into character, Jackman took ice-cold showers every morning. This method started by accident. One morning, only cold water came out of his shower, and he clenched his teeth to avoid waking his wife with a scream. It reminded him that Wolverine always feels like this, so he made cold showers a daily routine before shooting. Jackman's height, 6 feet 2 inches, was far taller than Wolverine's 5 feet 3 inches comic book stature. To compensate, the production team used various tricks to make him appear shorter, such as filming him from certain angles or using closer shots. while other actors wore platform shoes. In the film, Storm's eyes glow only when she uses her powers, whereas in the comics, they glow constantly. Initially, Halle Berry was supposed to wear white contact lenses for certain scenes, but after trying them once, she refused to wear them again, so the glowing effect was added in post-production. The designers also decided to make her eyes glow change based on her mood. On the other hand, Tyler Mane, who played Sabretooth, wore his lenses for so long that he temporarily lost his vision. Rebecca Romijn, who played Mystique, couldn't wear colored contact lenses due to her sensitive eyes. The team tried layering porous lenses under yellow ones, but even then, she could only wear them for an hour. She was practically blind in them, so action scenes were filmed without the lenses, and the necessary effects were added digitally. Mystique's elaborate costume consisted of 110 reusable silicone prosthetics, covering 2/3 of Romijn's body. The prosthetics and exposed skin were painted blue. Initially, food coloring was considered, but Singer insisted on an opaque paint to match the comics. The entire makeup process took 7 to 9 hours. During production, Romijn was forbidden from drinking alcohol or using skincare products, as they could affect her skin's adhesion to the prosthetics. She barely interacted with her co-stars and felt isolated, later describing the experience as pure hell. For the scene where Senator Kelly's body liquefies, multiple digital layers were used, including water and skin textures. Rendering each frame took 39 hours. Originally, the effects team wanted to show Kelly's internal organs mutating, but they decided it would be too disturbing. Despite the impressive visual effects, VFX supervisor Michael Fink later stated he was dissatisfied with his work on the film. The scene where a boy smiles at Cyclops was unscripted. Originally, Cyclops was just supposed to check the train schedule, but the young actor, a huge X-Men fan, kept staring at James Marsden. During one take, Marsden finally acknowledged the boy and smiled back, and Singer decided to keep the moment in the final cut. Interestingly, when filming at the train station, security mistook Singer for a bystander and refused to let him onto the set. The film's original composer was supposed to be Academy Award winner John Williams, but he declined due to his work on Saving Private Ryan. Singer then turned to his longtime collaborator John Ottman, but when the film's release date was moved from December to July, Ottman was unavailable due to directing Urban Legends: Final Cut. In the end, X-Men's score was composed by Michael Kamen, known for his work on Die Hard and Lethal Weapon. The filmmakers deliberately chose to avoid the bright spandex costumes from the comics, believing they wouldn't fit the serious tone of the film. There's even a nod to this decision in the script.
You actually go outside in these things?
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
According to Singer, he intentionally included a joke aimed at fans who disliked the new costume designs. Speaking of references, the film contains several nods to real-world social issues. Senator Kelly's proposal to register mutants parallels U.S. congressional efforts to ban communism. He also questions whether mutants should be allowed to teach children, mirroring the UK's ban on LGBTQ+ teachers, a law that Ian McKellen actively protested. Additionally, Magneto's remark about mutants being forced to wear shackles and branded with numbers evokes the treatment of undesirables in Nazi Germany. Meanwhile, the ideological divide between Magneto and Professor X is reminiscent of Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., who had opposing philosophical approaches to civil rights. What historical parallels did you notice in the film? Movie mistakes and errors. Now, let's count the various mistakes and goofs that X-Men creators couldn't avoid. Right at the beginning of the film, there are several historical inaccuracies. For example, the Nazi guards are shown wearing steel helmets, but in reality, these were used only in combat, and they should have been wearing garrison caps instead. Additionally, Nazis would immediately separate men and women upon arrival at the concentration camp. meaning Eric and his father would have been separated from his mother long before the moment shown in the film. The selection of genocide victims was also conducted by SS doctors, who determined whether a person was fit to work or should be executed. However, in the film, the Nazis appear to make this decision simply by looking at the prisoners. The yellow star on Eric's father's coat is initially on the left side, but a few seconds later, it appears on the right. Rogue talks about Niagara Falls while pointing at the border between Minnesota and Wisconsin, even though the falls are actually located between New York and Ontario. The veins on the face of the boy Rogue kisses become visible even in places where they shouldn't be. Professor X, sitting in the middle of a hall in his wheelchair, somehow manages to catch up with Magneto in just a few seconds. Windows look completely different from the inside compared to the outside of a building. A corridor is brightly lit by daylight, yet Magneto's face is strangely obscured by unexplained darkness. Wolverine drinks from a glass that wasn't there before and disappears afterward, then smokes an equally mysterious cigar. A new ashtray suddenly appears between the glass and a can that weren't present a second earlier. The jacket of a man fighting Wolverine slips off his shoulders, then reappears. At the same time, Wolverine's claws momentarily disappear, even though they're clearly visible from another angle. A window that was just open is suddenly closed in the next shot, and then open again. When a trailer drives by, the road is visible, but when the vehicle stops, there is suddenly much more snow. Wolverine and Rogue drive past thick woods, but in the next moment, the forest appears much less dense. When Wolverine crashes into a fallen tree, he flies through the windshield, shattering it. But in the next shot, there is only a small hole, and then suddenly, the glass is intact again. Also, at a relatively low speed, he would have likely just hit the steering wheel rather than being thrown dozens of feet away. Cyclops raises his hand to his visor, but in the next shot, his hand is suddenly down. When Magneto pulls the dog tag off Sabretooth's neck using his powers, the fishing wire used to lift it is clearly visible. Senator Robert Kelly is inexplicably using a presidential helicopter, as indicated by the emblem on it. Also, a common movie mistake. The characters can have a normal conversation on board, whereas, in reality, they'd barely be able to shout over the noise. Mystique, disguised as the senator's assistant, places a phone in the inner pocket of her suit. But when she transforms back into her true form, the phone has vanished. A blanket reaches Wolverine's chest, but in the next shot, it only covers his waist. Wolverine's claws usually extend from between his fingers, but at one point, they appear to come out from the back of his hand. The condensation from Magneto and Mystique's breath moves to the left, while from Kelly's breath, it oddly moves to the right. While talking to Rogue, Wolverine sits on the edge of the bed, but when he falls after touching her, he is suddenly standing. Magneto bends the bars of his prison cell, yet the two outermost bars remain straight. However, when he steps out, 4 bars are now intact instead of 2. But in the next shot, only 2 are straight again. When Rogue is talking to Bobby, her hair changes position multiple times. Magneto protects his brain from Xavier's powers with his helmet, but this makes little sense as his face remains completely exposed. Wolverine hugs Rogue by the shoulders, but in the next shot, he's holding her by the head. The wires suspending a man thrown aside by Sabretooth are clearly visible. Cyclops wears gloves throughout the film, but when he runs toward Jean, they are suddenly missing, just like the chains that were on Wolverine's wrists moments earlier. Cyclops touches his visor with his left hand, but in the next shot, he's using his right. Wolverine slashes at Sabretooth's face, but doesn't seem to make contact, and his claws strangely leave no marks on the wall. Wolverine grips the top of the Statue of Liberty's head with his claws, yet in the next moment, he's positioned at ear level. Wolverine extends a single claw towards Sabretooth, but in the next shot, all 3 are out. By the end of the film, a pawn on the chessboard suddenly vanishes. Despite these inconsistencies, audiences still enjoyed the film. Do movie mistakes affect your viewing experience? Deleted scenes and bloopers. In an interview, Hugh Jackman revealed that over 40 minutes of footage was cut from X-Men, with the film being re-edited just a week before its release. It's unlikely we'll ever see a full extended version, but some deleted scenes have been made available. These include extended versions of Storm and Cyclops lessons, a scene where Bobby escorts Rogue to her dorm, as well as additional interactions between Rogue and Storm, and a conversation between Jean and Professor X. Interestingly, the special DVD edition, X-Men 1.5, allows viewers to insert these scenes back into the film, extending its runtime from the standard 104 minutes to 111 minutes. The filmmakers also intended to include scenes depicting Storm and Cyclops' childhoods. These sequences were in the script, and storyboards were even created, but they were never filmed. There were plans to shoot them during the production of the sequel and release them in a special edition, but this idea was never realized. Interestingly, even in a PG-13 rated film, one moment was deemed too strong for TV. In the FX channel version, Wolverine's line, "You're a dick," directed at Cyclops, was changed to "You're a dork." Now, let's check out a fun blooper reel from the set. During filming, Bryan Singer jokingly asked one of the stunt performers to wear a Spider-Man costume and crash into the actors during a take. The footage shows Spider-Man realizing he's in the wrong movie and running away, while the cast bursts into laughter at his unexpected appearance.
I am completely wrong movie. I am so
Worldwide recognition. Superhero films of the 1990s struggled to achieve significant success with audiences and critics, and Marvel hoped that X-Men would change that. The film's success was not only expected to launch an X-Men series, but also reignite interest in other Marvel franchises, like Spider-Man and Fantastic Four. To support this, in addition to the main $75 million budget, Fox agreed to allocate an additional $22 million for a promotional campaign, including TV spots, a website, a video game, and new comic releases. In hindsight, these extra expenses proved to be a wise investment. The premiere of X-Men took place on July 12, 2000 on Ellis Island. 2 days later, the film was released in theaters across the US and Canada, followed by a global release in August. The movie grossed a total of $296.3 million worldwide, making it the 9th highest grossing film of the year. Just as Marvel had hoped, X-Men helped revive the comic book and superhero movie genre. The film also received positive reviews from critics, who praised its engaging action sequences, impressive special effects, well-developed characters, and strong cast performances. However, some noted that the heavy focus on Wolverine left other equally interesting characters with limited screen time. Awards season also recognized X-Men. The Saturn Awards nominated the film in 10 categories, with 6 wins: Best Science Fiction Film, Best Director, Best Screenplay, Best Costumes, Best Actor for Jackman, and Best Supporting Actress for Romian. Meanwhile, the MTV Movie Awards nominated X-Men for Best Movie, Best On-Screen Team, and Breakthrough Performance for Jackman. But unfortunately, the film lost in all 3 categories. With strong box office performance, a sequel was quickly greenlit. X2, X-Men United was released in April 2003 and proved just as successful as the first film, paving the way for even more sequels. In 2006, the trilogy concluded with X-Men: The Last Stand, followed by a series of prequels from 2009 to 2020, including the Wolverine trilogy and the spin-off The New Mutants. Additionally, Hugh Jackman's Wolverine returned in the new Deadpool and Wolverine film, which premiered on July 24, 2024. Who is your favorite X-Men character?